Thank you for having me, mashallah, on the Saturday
Alhamdulillah.
morning.
Saturday morning, yeah. Alhamdulillah. Well, thank you
Yeah,
for joining us again. So I'm Safir for the attendees and for those who watch it later. And I'm joined by Tariq, who's one of the co-founders of Inshallah. And maybe Tariq, you have a pretty unique background. So we'll start with that and then how it led you to crypto, and then we can talk about crypto and how it can advance halal finance, inshallah.
inshallah. Thank you very much, Safir bhai. It's very good to be here with everyone. I see some familiar names as well. Um, yeah, in terms of my background, I was, born in Singapore, grew up in Texas, like a lot of people. And I think like a lot of people growing up in America, you, especially the son of brown parents who emphasize education a lot. Um, you're always searching for a way to combine uh, your school education with your Islamic education. So I went to madrasa pretty early on, um, and it was very syncretic because I went to this, Pakistani madrasa, and the kind where you get bidais and hits, And then I go to high school, and it was a very nerdy science high school. So you're always trying to find ways to combine the two. And then I went off to Stanford. I did computer science and AI, and I continued my Islamic studies first at Baina, the Arabic Institute, and then with some teachers around the Bay Area. Still searching for the way to combine, both the secular and the Islamic. Um, and then I continued you could say both tracks after school. I, tried to do startups, and like many startup founders failed, but not like Safir, who mashallah succeeded many times. We're still trying to follow in his footsteps. Um, and but it was a learning experience, and then I also had the chance to travel and study in different places. For example, Mauritania, and then in Egypt, where I am now, and continuing my studies. But besides my studies, I also noticed one thing throughout this journey. I was also working at Google at the time, on and off. But I noticed one thing throughout this journey, especially in the Muslim world, in different parts of the Muslim world, in Egypt, in Turkey, where I spent some time, and that was the Muslim world struggled with its finances, you could say. And in particular, what was unique to the Muslim world, because a lot of developing countries struggle with finances, but what was unique to the Muslim world is the best means of, getting out of the struggle, um, were, contradictory to the Sharia, contradictory to Islam, uh, where largely riba based, which is taking loans or at a government level, issuing bonds. And and at a person level, holding treasuries, holding US treasuries. All of these were out of the picture for Muslims. And so I became attracted to um, the vision of and cryptocurrencies. And I know a lot of people will be skeptical, but we'll get into that, right? I'm sure Sophia will have very many critical questions. But the vision, if you go back to Satoshi's white paper and the Bitcoin white paper, the vision was all about this. The current financial system does not work for people. Um, it works for governments, it works for banks, it works for the rich, but it does not work for the people. And I found that very aligned um, with the Islamic vision of finance, which is about working for people and about productive labor. And so I thought, how can we onboard Muslims into crypto? So that was the beginning of the journey of Inshallah.
Very nice,
Yeah.
alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Um, so let's maybe talk about crypto, and you kind of alluded to it at the end, where I think we as Americans, we realize this less because we are the beneficiaries at the end of the day of the dollar, and it's often used in the outside world as almost a weapon. It is used as a weapon, especially lately in history. So we don't realize to what extent that we actually benefit from the stability of the dollar and its increasing value. And so, um, in terms of, let's talk about like how crypto maybe works at like a 30,000 foot level of maybe some of the transaction level and stuff like that, because I think that will allude to why it's not some mythical magic thing, that there's a
Yeah.
process uh and how that works. And then we'll talk about like uh how we as individuals can benefit from that and so on.
Okay. Um, yeah. So I think crypto at a 30,000 foot level, and there's an excellent book actually. It's called Blockchain for Babies. But I think
Watching
that
for
does,
babies.
yeah, Blockchain for Babies.
Okay.
Literally
Okay.
explaining blockchain for babies, like a little picture book. But I actually found it very helpful for even myself and for many people to understand crypto at a very high level. Um, and do we happen to have the pictures that I sent to you, or
Yeah,
could
I
I
can.
present it as well
You
here?
can
Either
present it
way is
as
better.
well. Yeah. If you
Okay,
let me
cool.
see if
So in terms of how blockchain works, I want to show something here. Let me see if I can. I'll send a request to share my screen. Okay, I think permission granted. Nice. Um, okay, I think people can see this. Um, it's helpful to understand how blockchain works and crypto works. It's very helpful to understand how modern finance works. Um, and I do want to get into the history a little bit later, Safir, if you give me the opportunity, because I think that's very important to understand why cryptocurrency and blockchain is important for Muslims
mm,
specifically. But right now, I won't get into the history, but I will show you this, which is a very early ledger. It's actually from the Medici family and the 1400s. Um, and they kind of are the early architects of the modern financial system. But all this is it's a series of people's names and transactions. And then as you can see, the numbers, of course, this is like old Latin or Italian, but you can see the numbers on the right-hand side. And that's deposits and withdrawals. That's all that is. And this is an early form of a ledger. A ledger, all it is uh, names, deposits, and withdrawals. Transactions like, Safir bought a cup from Amazon, or Tariq bought an iPhone from Apple, and it cost $900. Insane price, by the way, but yeah, $900. Okay, that's a ledger, and it already existed 700 years ago, and actually even before that, but this is a very early example. I think everyone can recognize this ledger, which is a credit card statement. Uh, if you open up your credit card app, Chase or whatever, Citibank, you'll see this statement. This is also a ledger. It's transactions, dates, and the amount for the transaction. That's all blockchain is, actually. Blockchain is just a ledger. It's a notebook of transactions that happen. Alice pays Bob $20. Bob pays Charlie $40. Now, your question naturally would be, well, uh, your question naturally would be, well, okay, I know the ledger from the credit card company is trustworthy because they're a credit card company. They're Chase, they're Visa, they're MasterCard. I know the ledger from the Medici family is trustworthy because Medici, right? Um, but how do I know this thing is trustworthy? Who's guaranteeing that this ledger is accurate? Well, there's no central party because remember the vision of cryptocurrency was that Governments are manipulating the financial system. Banks are manipulating the financial system. Credit card companies are manipulating. They're rejecting your transactions because you try to go to a restaurant called Holy Land, and that has right. That's a restaurant in the Bay Area, I believe.
Yeah.
Still,
I
right?
went there last week.
Okay, awesome. Um, there used to be an organization called the Holy Land Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it was unfortunately, or for whatever happened, it got shut down. Um, Now, let's say they said, oh, this transaction looks like it's being sent to Holy Land. We're going to deny it. It happens to people. So crypto said this ledger is not going to be controlled by anyone. Rather, everyone is going to have, or a lot of different people are going to have copies of this ledger. And that way, we ensure that there's no forged or fraudulent transactions on the ledger. And as the ledger evolves, there's more and more transactions. We're just going to add more and more pages or blocks, and that's where you get the name blockchain. It's just a chain of ledgers and a chain of blocks or a chain of pages in this notebook that's a ledger. So that's crypto at a blockchain at a 30,000 foot level.
Okay, very good. So this is really we're talking about at the transaction level that,
Yeah.
I as Safir is, sending some money basically to Tariq, and the underlying system is all based off of a ledger system, which is validated by other parties in the network, multiple parties in the network to assure that. And we'll talk about some of the rewards that people get for that. But so we talked about the ledger. Now let's talk about the quote unquote coins. Where does the concept of coins come in, like Bitcoin? And then I want
Mm-hmm.
to get to it later, but like now we have stable coins that are
Yeah.
coming to the
Yeah.
rise. And maybe you can talk about differentiating those two as well.
Yeah. So the basic concept is like, okay, going back to this notebook, right? Um, and this notebook, we had it in dollars. Alice pays Bob $20. Bob pays Charlie $40. Uh, but there's really no necessity of having it in dollars. Um, and rather, as we again, the core vision of especially Bitcoin and Satoshi's white paper was we don't want to tie this to the current financial system because if it was in dollars, then uh, the U.S. government puts $1 billion tomorrow, all your money on the blockchain is worth less. So he said, okay, since this is just we're starting off with a fresh notebook, a fresh ledger, we will just call the payments in this ledger as Bitcoin, as a token, this new token called Bitcoin. So now any payments you make that are recorded on this ledger, Safir pays, um, Farhan, Safir pays Farhan 10 something. He said, okay, we'll call it Bitcoin. That's what the token was. And then every other token after that, Ethereum, Solana, they are just the same. They're at the core, they're the same concept. They're notebooks, they're just new notebooks. And instead of tying it to any other ledger system, whether it's your credit card ledger or the government or the Wells Fargo bank ledger, they said we're just going to have our own new ledger, new notebook, new token of payment, new currency to pay in. Those are the tokens. Um, so when you go buy a token on Coinbase, when you go buy a token on Kraken, on Binance, on Robinhood, what's happening essentially is uh, Robinhood says Robinhood pays Safir 400 Solana. That's a new transaction according to that letter. And um, and then they show you on your app like, oh, you have 400 Solana. So that's the token. That makes sense.
And so every coin would have their own network like this, right? They differ slightly
Exactly.
from what I understand, but but they all have
Yes.
their own independent network basically that they operate in. And those are the coin holders. Whoever is holding those coins, they're the ones that are, like in this example, Alice and Bob, they're the ones who are validating the transaction, other transactions.
So that was for the sake of simplification, right? In here, I showed you like, okay, how do you trust people? So I said Alice and Bob, well, everyone has their own version of the ledger.
Hmm.
Um, but like keeping this big notebook, like even if it was just a physical notebook, imagine every day people are adding transactions. Pretty soon you're gonna have to fill up a whole room with all your
Yeah.
notebooks, right? Um, and then your wife is gonna yell at you, like, why do you have a room full of notebooks? So same thing with this, right? Pretty soon your whole computer will be burdened with um, all the transactions on the ledger. So instead of saying, okay, every person who holds this token has to have the full copy of the ledger, we're going to have a different set of people. And these people are going to keep track of all the transactions. They're like the bookkeeper. They are the Medici family, right?
Hmm.
But it doesn't have to be, the difference is it's not, again, centralized to one person. Anyone can decide, hey, I want to be a bookkeeper. I want to be in charge of the transactions. Um, Anyone can do it. Anyone with a computer can do it, right? And those are called, in Bitcoin, they're called miners. Um, and in Ethereum and Solana, they're called validators. But at the end of the day, all they are bookkeepers that keep track of the transactions. Now, you might say, why would I want to keep track of these transactions? Seems like a huge burden with no payoff. So, as part of the blockchain system, they made an inbuilt payment system. So, anyone who keeps track of these transactions will get paid to do so. In Bitcoin, it happens by mining. So, um, by adding a new page to the notebook, which is this blockchain, right? Adding a new ledger page, you earn some Bitcoin. And similarly in other blockchains as well.
So that's a transaction fee almost for when someone does a transaction. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a transaction fee. I mean, this is getting into the technicalities, right? But um, there's a transaction fee. Yeah, so everyone pays a transaction fee, and whoever writes the new page on this ledger, whoever adds the new block, they get paid those transaction fees. There's also a block reward, usually. So, uh, like new Bitcoin is minted and given to you for adding this new page to the notebook.
Got it. So I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about history and then tying it to Islamic finance. But before that, real quick, I think it's worth explaining the traditional government world. They can issue new currency anytime. They've done that
Yeah,
before. You
yeah,
know, we think of it as like impacting our value here. Like if you're American and you live here, like it impacts our value. You don't realize the tsunami basically on the other side for every
yeah,
other country in the world.
yeah.
So talk to us a little bit how Bitcoin adds new coins, and there's a limitation on that. Just so people
Mhm.
understand that there's something that you can never change basically in that regard, right?
Yeah, yeah. So in the uh, modern financial system, uh, basically what happens is that the government at will can print money. Okay, I don't know. People are going to say, "Oh, they don't have a money printer." No. I know it's not physical printing, but they can create money out of thin air, literally, and that's why it's called fiat, because in Latin, fiat means "let it be," right? So um, it's kind of very it's even a little shirky in a sense, because it's like they're creating it out of nothing, um, whereas we believe only Allah can create out of nothing. Uh, and the name itself is kind of uh, alludes a little bit to that. But what happens when the US government clicks print? Well, people around the world, like you said, not just in America, we face a little bit of inflation, 5-6%. But other countries, like for example, I'm in Egypt, they have to hold massive reserves of dollars because they have loans to pay back in dollars. Um, and so that's being inflated. And then on top of that, they have their own currency, right? Which they're applying the same system to. So it's a double whammy of inflation for all these countries. And that's why across the board, Muslim countries and any developing country usually struggle with inflation, except countries that have pegged their currency to the value of the dollar, like Saudi, like the UAE, and such. Bitcoin, on the other hand, um, specifically Bitcoin, said, okay, yes, we are going to mint new currencies, but there's new Bitcoin tokens, but there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin, ever. So from right now, and I believe that's ends sometime in the 2100s, but from right now, and it's getting less and less, the inflation every year. Um, and so from right now that there's never going to be more than this amount of tokens, which is why the price of Bitcoin keeps going up and up and up. And even Ethereum and Solana, these other tokens, they have very defined inflation rates. And actually, in fact, Ethereum sometimes is deflationary. And Solana has a very defined inflation curve and will eventually become 1.5%. So there's no inflation when the government, today, the inflation is when the government wants to bomb, Iran, when the government wants to, issue COVID rebates to people. Then there's inflation because the government has to print more money. It's arbitrary. But these blockchains, they're not arbitrary. They're baked into the system, and that can't be changed.
Perfect. So, I'm very curious about this topic, about and actually I was discussing it with a mutual friend of ours of after
Yeah.
there's been political stuff that's happening here around the country about what our financial system should look like. So I was very curious about what did our financial system exist in Islamic history? So I think it's very timely, and maybe you can expand on what did it look like? Like, we know a little bit that maybe it might have been based on gold and stuff like that, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can expand on that, and then we can jump into the relationship with some of those attributes and how it kind of relates to crypto.
Yeah. Excuse me, I'm still recovering from a cold, but I think there are a few principles of the Islamic financial system. Number one, uh, people think that Islam. The number one thing I'll say is that people think that Islam didn't encourage wealth or doesn't encourage wealth. However, Islam kind of takes a more neutral stance. It's neither the prosperity gospel of the Protestants, where more wealth means you're more blessed and you're at a higher level. But at the same time, the Prophet did say in a hadith that there are only two people worthy of being envied, and one of them is a man, رجل آتاه الله مالا فسلطه على هلكته في الحق. That it's a man who is given money and wealth, and the phrasing of the hadith is very profound. He submits it, or rather, he kind of extinguishes it in the pursuit of truth. So wealth is seen as important. That's the first thing I would say. If it's used in a sincere manner for the truth. Number two, I would say that as some of the ulama said, that the purpose of the financial system was to acquire what other people have, because everyone has something to give in the world, right? A country has one country has oil, another country has gold, another country has a lot of people, it's a labor force. But the point of a just economic system and all the rules of Islamic finance is to acquire what another person has without force, without trickery, without oppression, and in a way that prevents war, in a way that prevents oppression, and rewards people for productive labor. And finally, the last thing I would say, kind of the icing on top, is that the entire Islamic economic ethos is actually even a means of getting closer to Allah. The enforcement of these rules is a means of getting closer to Allah. Doing our transactions is a means of getting closer to Allah. And there's a story that's recorded of a scholar, his name was Ibn Jama'ah, and it said that the people of his area, I believe is in Tunisia, asked him to write a book on how to get closer to Allah. They said, can you write us a book on how to get closer to Allah, because we see you as a pious person and we just want something that moves the heart, and he said, okay, I'll write something. And he comes back with a book on the rules of buying and selling. And the people are like, what is this? We asked you to something on, we wanted some iman lifters, some iman boosters, and you're talking to us about buying and selling. He said, the person who buys in a haram means or with haram money will be eating haram. And the person who eats haram, his heart will be filled with haram. And so he'll never be able to get closer to Allah. So that is the Islamic financial system. It's about no oppression of wealth, and it's about getting closer to Allah, and it's about using this wealth for the pursuit of truth. The problem is the modern financial system is at complete odds with that. Complete odds. And from the very core, such that even if you try to, in some means, return to the Islamic economic system, you will destroy your economy. And I think we saw an example of that with Turkey. And that's just one example. There's other examples as well. But in Turkey, I think it was in 2021 or 2018, very recently, they tried to reduce the interest rate to zero. And the Turkish lira has been spiraling ever since, and it can't catch a break, and it's basically destroyed their economy. So it's literally impossible to return to its economic system. And why is that? For this, we need to dive into a little bit of financial history, if you'll allow me.
Yes, please.
As you know, everyone used to be using gold and silver. There were other currencies being used, and even Muslims used other currencies, but gold and silver was always at the forefront. And there's actually a famous story about Umar radiallahu anh, who actually wanted at the time to use camel hides as currency. But he was discouraged because he said it would actually kill all the camels, basically, because everyone would just be killing camels to make new money. But gold and silver were always at the center. What happened was there was these particular institutions in Europe, especially. The first of them being the Medici family banks, where people gained so much trust in these institutions that they would go deposit their gold and silver. They would get these notes, right? And that itself is not new. In fact, it was actually brought to Europe by Islam from China. And if you know the word check, it actually comes from a Persian word. I don't know Farsi, but something like check. And it came through the Arab word of sak, which also sukuk, which is used today. I think people know sukuk, but sukuk used to be a note for depositing money at a kind of bank institution. But what happened in Europe was people began to trust these bank institutions so much that, when Safir goes to the bank and deposits 5 gold coins, the Medici family and others started to notice, like, hey, he never comes back to collect these 5 gold coins. He just goes around with the note, the note that says, I have 5 gold coins, and he pays for that to everyone else. And so the first thing they started doing was they said, you know what? Since Safir never comes back, imagine I'm the gold coin holder. Since Safir never comes back, I can actually go to now. I see Deborah in the audience, so I'll just say, when Deborah comes to get a loan, I can actually loan her 10 gold coins as a note. Why? Because even though I only have 5 gold coins, Safir is never going to come back to get those 5 gold coins. So I lend her 10. And now I make more money through interest. And that's called the fractional reserve system. And that powers the entire world of finance today. The second major innovation that happened, and whether it's a good or bad innovation, that's up for us to decide, right? I think it's a bad innovation, but I'll let the audience decide. But the second innovation that happened was at the Bank of England in the 1700s. They were the first central bank. And essentially what happened is, instead of Medici family banks and these kind of family banks and decentralized banks, the government of England said, we're going to own the Bank of England. And now, not only is the Bank of England going to issue these notes, they're going to be the only ones to issue these notes. And it's not just backed by gold, but it's also backed by government loans. What do we mean backed by government loans? Well, when the Bank of England wanted to go to war, when England wanted to go to war with Napoleon, they didn't have enough money. So they said, okay, we will borrow a bunch of money, loans, bonds. Then the Bank of England will buy these bonds from us. Now you might say, okay, where did the Bank of England get the money? Well, the Bank of England is the one creating the notes. So they made notes out of thin air and they bought those bonds. And so now the notes are backed by not just gold, but also government bonds. And by the way, the interest from these bonds, you might think, oh, well, the government still has to pay interest. Well, the interest from the bonds goes back to the government. So basically, it's a free money printer. And this is actually, people don't know this, but this was actually very critical for England winning the war against Napoleon, for England winning the war, World War I, against the Ottomans, against Germany, for the downfall of the Khilafah. Because essentially they had, Napoleon was a much smarter general. He was one of the smartest generals, but England had an infinite money printer and Napoleon didn't. And that is still the system today that that the US government now uses to continuously destroy the Middle East, to continuously destroy Africa, in the past South America. That system, the infinite money printer, and it's powered by our demand for dollars. So I know that was a very long explanation. Apologies for the monologue, but I think it's very important for people to know. And so the original question was, how does crypto get us out of this, or how does crypto differ from this, right?
How does crypto kind of advance halal finance? And I think one thing I'll add to the principles that you said is, when we have Sheikh Umar in the previous webinars, he talks about a fair financial transaction system, right? Where today all of the world that we currently understand is, I go and I borrow money from someone and I have to pay some rate for that. They don't take on any risk besides credit, and I have to bear basically all the responsibility. Versus in Islamic transaction, it is fair on all parties. People can invest and they should invest, but they should benefit from the reward and the risk and kind of bear liability for that. Um, and I think fundamentally it's important to understand for people that it's very difficult to do that in the US financial system today, unless it's between private individuals. If it's with a bank, sometimes people ask us like, oh, why can't you start like an Islamic bank? Well, you can't.
Yeah.
It's tied to the whole system, basically. So now that we kind of understand that context, maybe talk to us about, okay, if we're gonna build um a new financial system with crypto, um, what are kind of some of the merits of how Islamic finance can fit in? And I think you guys at Inshallah are doing some very interesting things with the staking product, and now you have the lending aspect as well that you can maybe talk about as well. And it just how it touches in, because that's what people are most concerned about sometimes is where does it all fit in, kind of.
Yeah. Where does it all fit in? I mean, I think if we all agree that the current system is corrupt and doesn't help Muslims, in fact, hurts Muslims, both physically and financially, um, we're now looking for an alternative system, right? And I will say crypto is not the only alternative system. Like, I think a lot of people agree we can try to go back to gold, and a lot of people have tried to go back to gold. There was the Murabitun movement, um, where they tried to mint gold coins. There was even a state in Malaysia, I believe it was called Kelantan. It is called Kelantan. It's an actual state in Malaysia, on the border of Malaysia near Thailand. They actually minted gold coins in 2006. And they said, in this state, this is official tender. Here's the issue that happened. It's not that the world rejected this tender. The Malaysian government itself, which I think many Muslims see as one of the best Muslim governments in the world, rejected the gold dinar, and they said, this is not official tender. And so that project got shut down. So now what alternative do we have? I would say crypto is the only alternative to the current financial system. Cryptocurrencies is the only alternative to the current financial system that has gained so much momentum that it cannot be ignored anymore. It has gained, and so people might ask, okay, I don't buy all these arguments that Tariq made on the current system is bad and we need to move to a different system. Well, I'll make a very simple argument of why Muslims should care about crypto. It's too big to ignore at this point. Maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said it's different. But at this point, the literal US government has a strategic crypto and Bitcoin reserve. There are multiple states, including Texas, that just signed bills passing strategic Bitcoin reserves. And all I would say is, are we really going to play this game again where when a new technology comes up, we're going to say it's haram until it evolves, until it's so big it cannot possibly be ignored. And then we're going to say we're going to use it out of darura, out of necessity. That's what happened with modern finance. It's happening with the internet. It's happening with AI. It's happening with social media. And we cannot let it happen again with crypto. So now it comes to what are we doing, right? That's like kind of the next question.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially what we're doing is we are making halal high yield investment opportunities for Muslims powered by crypto. So, for example, you might say, okay, I mean, there's other offers for investment, right? I can go buy a house. I can, which mashallah, you should do with Neeyah. I can go, buy a stock. But to give you an idea of how high yield this is, one example of our investment is Solana, which is already a token that grows at 100% per year on average since it started. 100% per year. That means on average, every year your money doubles. On top of that, what we have done is we have made a purely halal way where you can, a purely interest-free way where you can earn anywhere from 8 to maybe 8 to 12% on that Solana yearly through profit sharing. That's one example. Another example that we have is, and that's going to come out very soon, is a halal savings account. And it's powered by stable coins. And the stable coins earn a yield. So for the first time, you can park your money in a savings account, earn actually more than the treasury yield. And it's all halal, powered by profit sharing in a productive economy. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we're doing.
And I think from what I understand, the way that you're able to provide a profit share to the holders is there is some benefit that you get as being the validator essentially in the network.
Yep,
And that's what you can share, and plus other mechanisms as well. Is that correct?
that's exactly right. So remember we mentioned early on that a blockchain has two parties. One is the buyers and sellers and all the people moving the tokens. But the other party are the people who are keeping track, the note takers, right? The ledger providers, the miners. Um, and in Ethereum and Solana, they're called the stakers. And we essentially operate a staking business. And when you put your money with us, we are using it to do this labor of keeping track of the transactions. We earn a reward for that. And then we give a certain percentage back. Actually, we give most of it back to the users. We keep about 5% ourselves.
Got it. Okay, I'll go for a couple more questions, and then we can have the audience ask some questions as well. So we kind of touched upon stable coins. So these are coins that are kind of created by the government that match to the respective currency. So does that, or you may correct me on that as well, but
Yeah.
how does that impact, I guess, the crypto movement as well?
Yeah.
Like if they become too popular, what kind of happens to something like Bitcoin and stuff like that?
I will say, number one, most stablecoins are not made by the government. The biggest two stablecoins are not made by the government, which is USDT and USDC. One
That's
of the
Tether.
stablecoins, yeah, USDT is Tether, USDC is Circle. They just IPO'd and went public. Neither of them are made by the government. However, this class of stablecoins, I would say, is very dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Well, it kind of, on one hand, nixes the entire philosophy and vision of cryptocurrency. It provides, yes, it's a very good peer-to-peer cash system, and a better one than Bitcoin, a better one than just sending Ethereum, a better one than just sending Solana, because people around the world love dollars. And you can't go to someone, in Pakistan, like someone in the village or Nigeria, and be like, hey, brother, you need to stop using dollars. It's, enforcing the US hegemony, and you need to use this thing called Bitcoin or even Solana. I mean, like, there's a hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah.
These people you cannot be telling them they need to stop worrying about dollars while we have dollars in our bank account, spending dollars at the coffee shop. So on that end, stablecoins are good, but on the other end, they are dangerous because for the exact reason that I mentioned, they enforce the dollar demand and the dollar hegemony because in the background, they are backed by continuously buying those loans from the government, those bonds from the government. And so that powers the very infinite money printer that we're trying to get rid of that the government has. And it powers, the bombs in the Middle
Well,
East and
they have to
Afghanistan, Iraq.
store 1-to-1 with the dollar,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And then you go back to the example that you said earlier on of the bank, the family,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're gonna end up in square one basically again.
Exactly. So that's why those stable coins are very dangerous. USDT, USDC. In the long term, they're dangerous. Even though short term, they're very helpful. They are the number one use case of crypto, by the way, in the Muslim world, by far. And I think Muslims in America don't get that so many people are using this overseas, especially in certain countries like Turkey and Egypt and Nigeria. On the other hand, stablecoins as a concept are not bad for the reasons we mentioned. As a concept, all a stablecoin is it's something, a token whose price is pegged to the US dollar. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to hold US dollars, you have to hold treasuries, because you can back it with something else. So currently we are making our own stablecoin. We're backing it with Solana. And you could also, in the future, we could also incorporate, and we do plan to incorporate other assets. Like we could back it with gold. We could back it with commodities, different commodities. We could back it with Bitcoin. So we could even back it maybe one day with real estate, right? So stablecoins as a concept are the most helpful use case to Muslims on the ground in Muslim countries. But the current implementations of them are dangerous in the long term. So we're building our own implementation. And inshallah, that'll be helpful for Muslims, but also not reinforce the dollar demand.
Wonderful. Okay. I learned a lot today, alhamdulillah. Any questions that we can answer from the audience, drop them into the Q&A or the comments. And let me see if I had any other ones. So one question, that obvious one that we didn't talk about, was the volatility aspect. Like, why are these coins so volatile? If you can maybe touch on that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually a feature, not a bug. If that makes sense. Why is that? Well, because of these cycles, when the price goes up, people get interested and they start learning about what this is all about. I'll be honest, myself, I didn't get into this because I read the paper. At the very first instance, I didn't get into it because of that. But I saw the price and I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. What is this thing? And then I went and read the papers and I read the philosophy and the vision behind it. And then you might say, well, why doesn't the price just keep going up? Well, obviously it's not, like people who follow stocks, especially technology stocks, any new technology, people believe in it. There's a hype of believing in it, and then people lose belief in it. But in the long term, the technology, if it's good, will continue to grow. And that's what we've seen with these tokens, the successful tokens, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. If you actually plot them according to a log curve, I saw someone do this very recently, and it was very interesting. If you plot the price of Bitcoin on a logarithmic curve with time, it's literally actually a straight line up. So over the long term, what that means over the long term, it's only going up. And what I would say is just use the volatility of this to pique the interest of people, pique your interest, and then actually learn what the philosophy behind it. And then if you believe in it, buy it at the right time. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, there's a question about how staking works, how the yield is being generated, and then what makes it a halal yield from crypto versus from Coinbase. Maybe you can talk about we've talked about it a little bit before one-on-one, is like the validation framework and kind of how that works, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So how staking works in particular. So I mentioned there are people who keep track of the ledger, and in Bitcoin they're called miners, and it's a slightly different concept. In in Ethereum and Solana, they're called validators. And they don't have to expend a lot of electricity and power like in Bitcoin in order to add pages to this ledger notebook or blocks to the blockchain. But what they do have to do is they have to have capital. So in order to, for example, in Ethereum, in order to run your own validator, you have to have 32 Ethereum. So not anyone can do it. 32 Ethereum is a lot of money. It's like maybe, what is it now? Maybe $80,000, something like that. So not easy just for one person to set it up. And even if you had the money, it's a lot of work to set it up, to monitor it, to run it in a very performant way, so that you actually make money. So staking, all it is, it says, okay, if you know Islamic finance, it's a mudaraba or a qirad, or it's a profit sharing. You know, whoever asked the question, maybe is Iqbal, I'll just say. Iqbal says, okay, I want to make some money off of this ledger keeping operation, but I don't want to spend time running this validator, and I don't want to buy 32 Ethereum. So I'm going to give one of my Ethereum to Tariq, and he's going to run the ledger operation. And then I'm going to take my share of the reward. So that's what staking is. And how is the yield being generated? Well, we mentioned it earlier, from the transaction fees and from the block rewards. Okay, so that part is actually quite similar to Bitcoin mining, where the yield comes from, where the rewards come from. In terms of what makes our yield halal versus something from Coinbase, well, as I mentioned, what is the job of the validator? They are recording these transactions on the ledger. And in some sense, it's actually one step beyond just recording. It's more like your credit card company, where they are actually executing the transaction on your behalf, right? When you go with your credit card down the street to like a coffee shop and you buy your large, you know, vanilla, mocha, whatever frap, right?
That's not a
And
coffee,
you
but
pay,
yeah.
okay. I don't know what the, degree of coffee, fills, right? You buy your mint mojito or something. But that's not a coffee either. But yeah.
That is
So you buy,
that's my coffee.
that's your coffee. Okay. You buy a mint mojito. You might think I am paying Phil's $5, but what's actually happening is the credit card company is paying Phil's $5, and it's simply recording on your ledger, and they're executing the transaction, and then they're going to collect the money from you later. Now, and they are making some money from that, right? The transaction fee on the merchant fee. Now, what if you're running a credit card company, and somebody goes and buys a wine, right? A wine. Somebody goes and, Billah, buys a entry into a area that's not very, family friendly. I'll just say that, right? These things are haram, but the credit card company is making money off of it. So if you had, if you're directly profit sharing with a credit card company, you are making some money off the haram. It's the same thing with the validators. There are all kinds of transactions happening. Some of them are halal, some of them are haram. Some of them are interest-based loans. Some of them are just, Safir sending money back to his family from India, Pakistan,
Hyderabad, yeah.
Hyderabad, sending some money back to his family in Hyderabad, right? Good transaction, mashallah. You want to support that. But some of them are leverage transactions. So you don't want to make money off the haram transactions. So what we do is our validator only accepts halal transactions. We only record halal transactions. And we don't take any money, we don't take any fees from the haram ones. And at the same time, we've optimized it to the point where it is actually one of the best performing validators, specifically on Solana. And so yeah, it's like a win-win for Muslims.
Okay, one more question is why have you guys selected Solana?
It's fast and cheap, and that's what the Muslim Ummah needs, right? Uh, if you execute a transaction on Bitcoin, it might cost anywhere from $1 to $3. And for us in America, if we're in America, that's like nothing to us, right? Same thing on Ethereum, it might cost $1. Um, it might be nothing to us, but for a person in, you know, India, for a person in Turkey, these are big amounts of money, For $1, you can buy yourself an entire biryani and samosa and chai, right? Um, so that's basically the reason for going for Solana for now. But I will say we're not tied to any one blockchain. So um, we do plan to support Bitcoin and Ethereum in the future more
Yeah,
explicitly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I learned a lot, alhamdulillah. So thank you so much for joining
Alhamdulillah.
us. If you have any other inspiring words for us as we close, but I think I don't have much. I don't think I have any crypto with inshallah, so I need to go buy some. But
All
any other
right. Yeah,
comments
you
that
can
you
get
want to
some.
make?
Um, I think I don't know. I don't have any inspiring speech or something, but
Anything is fine. Yeah.
I would just say that I think it's important for even if you don't believe any of this crypto stuff. Uh, what is very important is for Muslims to number one understand their own Islamic finance system at even a very cursory level. So go read a book like Introduction to Islamic Finance by Mufti Taqi Usmani, um, or The Origin of Islamic Economic Thought, or take a local class, on the rules of buying and selling. Just at the very least, so you can understand, like, okay, what are we as Muslims trying to embody and trying to strive for? Even if I don't believe the crypto thing is the way, uh, maybe gold is another way. Maybe buying houses is another way. Uh, maybe just making dua is another way. But at least you know what the ideal is, and I hope everyone goes and does that. That's what I hope for, inshallah.
Yeah. And I think one thing I'll add there is that I think there is Muslims and even non-Muslims who are fed up with the current system, right? And we see it at least in terms of Neeyah that they're looking for alternative ways for home financing. They just feel like what is this thing? What am I benefiting out of this thing? And some guys just making money for no risk basically that he's taking. Right? They don't feel like it's a fair transaction. And I think you see it in the non-Muslim world as well.
Yep.
And so we have the opportunity, I think, to build a financial system for all people that is more aligned with our principles, that's fair, that's more equitable for everyone, So alhamdulillah, that's inspiring the
Alhamdulillah.
work that you're doing, alhamdulillah. And Jazakallah khair
Likewise.
for joining us on a Saturday evening, inshallah.
No, likewise. Jazakumullah khairan for having me, for the audience for listening in. And inshallah, this is the beginning of a journey for all of us for inshallah, for the audience members and for Neeyah. We're very excited about Neeyah as well. Um,
Alhamdulillah.
and maybe one day, when can we buy a house with crypto with Neeyah?
Inshallah, we're gonna make it happen. Inshallah, we're gonna make
All right, inshallah.
Yeah,
One day.
alrighty, take care. Assalamu
All
alaikum.
right. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.